My name is Juniper Miles, but everyone calls me June, except for my dad, who still insists on the full thing like it's a badge of honor. I'm 13, live with him and a pile of salvaged electronics in the back room of our little ranch-style house, and if you ask me, the most underrated place in the world is a garage with a soldering iron and some peace and quiet. Dad says I got my brain from my mom and my stubborn streak from the Marines. He would know, he spent 20 years as one. Now he's retired, mostly keeps to himself, builds birdhouses, and drinks the worst black coffee imaginable. But when I'm up late rewiring busted walkie-talkies or pulling capacitors from old drones, he'll sometimes bring me a mug, set it beside my mess, and grunt, "Keep going." I think that's his version of, "I'm proud of you." It all started with an idea. A dumb idea, maybe. But it wouldn't let go of me. I'd been watching some training videos with Dad one night. Not the flashy movie kind, but grainy helmet cam footage where soldiers toss grenades into empty rooms or clear out cardboard enemies in obstacle courses. I wasn't interested in blowing things up. I wanted to know why the tech always had to be so destructive. Like, why weren't there more non-lethal options that still packed a punch? Something disorienting but harmless. Something smart. So I built a grenade. Sort of. To be fair, it didn't look like one. Not really. It was the size of a softball, made of a flexible polymer shell I cast using an old 3D printer I restored myself. Inside was a compressed air chamber, a circular echo driver, and a little LED dispersion array I'd ripped from a broken theater light. When it triggered, the grenade would release a high-pitched pulse and a synchronized burst of colored light, enough to confuse, stun, and overwhelm the senses temporarily without harming anyone. A signal scrambler fit in the bottom, too, in case anyone nearby was trying to call for backup or use a drone. Trudy, my best friend since 3rd grade, called it the fruit snack of doom. She wasn't wrong. The thing looked like a rubber bouncy ball got mixed up with a disco light and lost a fight with a rubber duck. But it worked. I ran a dozen tests in Dad's workshop, using mannequins and one very grumpy cat. The effect was exactly what I wanted. Loud, bright, fast, and completely harmless. When I showed it to Dad, he just squinted at it like it might explode, then nodded once. "Interesting," he said. "You know Fort Rowan does a Family Day tech showcase, right?" I blinked. "You mean where the kids show off potato cannons and drone kits?" "It's more than that. It's for new ideas. Innovation." He looked at the grenade again. "Could be good for you to show this around. See what the brass think." I wasn't sure if he was joking. Me? Bring a glow-in-the-dark blob grenade to a real military base? You're kidding. Nope. You could use the practice. Showing your work. Explaining it. Standing by it. But they'll laugh at me. He shrugged. Let them. Just means they don't get it yet. That's how I found myself, 1 week later, in a folding chair at Fort Rowan, setting up a tiny table next to a row of polished drone displays and compact surveillance towers. I had one hand on my blue plastic crate, inside, the grenade prototype wrapped in foam, and the other holding a laminated poster I made the night before. Big letters. Non-lethal area denial device designed for urban engagement. Trudy was there too, of course. She kept elbowing me and whispering, "This is so weird. What if they think it's a prank?" I was already thinking it. Everything around us looked expensive, official, serious. I watched soldiers and engineers walk by in crisp uniforms. Some carried tablets. Others were laughing politely at kids, showing off drone stabilizer mods and toy-size exoskeleton arms. Then someone cleared his throat behind me. A man in decorated fatigues stood just outside my booth. Tall, square-shouldered, late 50s maybe. His eyebrows were like 2 storm clouds hanging over narrowed eyes. "What's this?" he asked, not unkindly, but not curious either. I stood up. "It's a prototype. A non-lethal grenade. For crowd control or disorientation." He reached forward and picked it up carefully, turning it in his hand. The thing let out a tiny chirp as his finger brushed the contact plate. He blinked, then chuckled. This thing a dog toy? My stomach tightened. No, sir. It's real. I mean, it's functional. He grinned, but it was the kind that made you feel smaller. I've seen chew toys with more bite than this. He set it down like it was made of jelly. You make this with a glitter gun? Behind him, a couple of junior officers passed by and snickered. One of them gave me a thumbs up and kept walking. The colonel, his name tag Red Remmer, shook his head. Keep at it, kid. Maybe you'll make something real next time. And with that, he walked away. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Trudy's hand landed on my shoulder, and I could feel her looking at me, waiting for a reaction. I just stared at the grenade on the table. It looked like a mistake. But I wasn't going to leave. Not yet. Not when I knew what it could do. Not when the quiet voice in the back of my mind, my dad's voice, was still saying, *, let them laugh. Let the results talk, *. So I stayed. And that's when everything started to change. The rest of Family Day stretched out like a slow-motion disappointment reel. I watched other kids get attention, praise, even polite applause. My grenade, brilliant, bizarre, unapologetically mine, sat on the edge of the table like a forgotten lunchbox. I tried to keep smiling. Dad had wandered off to catch up with some of his old squad mates, and Trudy was pretending to be fascinated by a portable solar shield 2 booths over. I stayed rooted to my folding chair, hands fidgeting in my lap, pretending I didn't notice the sideways glances. Some Marines paused when they saw my poster. Then they'd spot the grenade, tilt their heads like it didn't make sense, and move on. I didn't blame them. Who trusts a rubber ball weapon designed by a middle schooler? But that didn't stop the sting. Eventually, I pulled out my notebook and started sketching out version 2. Maybe the casing could be redesigned. Sleeker, more military. Less playful. Maybe if it didn't look like something you'd win at an arcade, someone would take it seriously. That was when I noticed him. Tall, lean, dressed down in fatigues without the excess ribbons and patches. He stood just off to the side, arms crossed, face unreadable. Is that your design? He asked, voice low and level. I nodded. Yeah. It's a prototype. Non-lethal tactical disruptor. It uses an echo pulse and synchronized flash to confuse and disorient targets within a short radius. He stepped closer and picked it up, but gently. Unlike the colonel earlier, there was no mockery in his expression. Just curiosity. You build it yourself? I nodded again. Tested it too. Works indoors and out. Safe for bystanders. No shrapnel. He turned it over, examining the seams, the trigger plate. That signal dish on the bottom, scrambler? Low range, but yes. About 30 feet. Enough to jam radios and simple drones temporarily. He grunted. Name's Sergeant Nolan Creed. Engineering Division. Mind if I show this to someone? I blinked. You want to? He gave me a tiny shrug. Not promising anything. But it's interesting. Trudy bounced over as soon as he walked away. Did that just happen? I think it did. Creed disappeared behind a row of green tent. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I started to think maybe he dropped it in a trash can and kept walking. Then a new woman showed up. She wasn't in a full uniform, more like field dress, with a digital tablet tucked under one arm and her hair in a tight braid. Her eyes scanned the poster, then landed on me. You're the designer? Yes, ma'am. Major Brenna Holt. Systems Review. Can you walk me through the deployment sequence? I stood, heart suddenly pounding. It's a manual trigger, but could be adapted for timed or remote. Once activated, the shell expands slightly to grip surfaces. Then it emits a high-frequency burst combined with visual flash. Total disorientation window is 5 to 7 seconds, long enough to restrain or relocate targets. She was already typing as I spoke. Tested range. 7 meters. 10 in ideal conditions. Rechargeable. No. Disposable polymer casing. recyclable components inside. Holt paused, then looked me dead in the eye. Did someone help you build this? No, ma'am. My dad's a Marine, but he just let me use his tools. She smiled, not patronizing but real. We've had 40 booths today. Yours is the only one that made 3 senior officers stop walking. That was when I saw him again. Colonel Remmer, arms folded, sunglasses on, watching from a few yards away. When our eyes met, his expression didn't change. But he didn't walk off this time. Major Holt turned back to me. Would you be willing to do a demonstration? I blinked. Here? Now? We've got a dummy corridor set up for training simulation. Low risk. Just need to see what this little ball of confusion can really do. I hesitated, then looked at Trudy. She grinned like she'd been waiting for this all day. You'll want ear protection, I said. Holt chuckled. I'll take my chances. We followed her to a canvas-covered structure at the edge of the field. Inside, there were mannequins positioned like enemy combatants, classic cardboard cutouts in camo vests with paper targets taped to their chests. A small crowd gathered outside, including a few skeptical Marines, clipboard officers, and yes, Colonel Remmer, still stone-faced. Major Holt handed me the grenade. Whenever you're ready. I stepped forward, placed it near the corner, and hit the trigger. There was a faint click, then nothing, for exactly 2 seconds. Then all at once, a blast of color brighter than expected, and a sharp pulsing tone that echoed down the corridor like a sonar wave in a metal tunnel. Even the mannequins looked stunned. Someone cursed. A few soldiers instinctively flinched or ducked. One guy dropped his phone. And then silence. The grenade rolled in a slow circle before coming to a stop, still humming faintly. I turned to Major Holt. Reset time is about 8 seconds. Enough for a squad to move in. She was already nodding. But the real shock came when Colonel Remmer finally stepped forward. He picked up the used grenade and examined it closely. His mouth tightened. Then he looked at me. Got a name for this thing? I hesitated. Not really. I just called it the Pulse. He nodded, then said nothing. But he didn't laugh. And that, somehow, felt bigger than applause. Major Holt turned to one of the aides. Get a requisition form started. We're running this through our /ND. I stared, not quite believing what I was hearing. Trudy whispered, You just broke the military. I wasn't sure what to say. My legs felt like gelatin, and I still had sawdust under my nails from sanding the casing last night. But then I saw Dad, standing near the back, arms crossed, a soft grin just barely tugging at his mouth. I held on to that image, because something told me things were about to change. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of burnt toast and the low rumble of Dad humming an old country tune. It was rare. He only did that when he was in a good mood or trying not to show nerve. I shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, and found him already dressed in a clean button-up and boots polished enough to reflect light. He slid a plate toward me. Eat. We've got a thing today. I blinked. A thing? Major Holt called. They want to run a formal demonstration. With brass. You'll need to show them how it works. Again. My heart dropped into my stomach like a stone. Like an actual military test? Yeah. At the proving range. And they want you there. Not me. Not someone else explaining it. You. I stared at the toast like it had betrayed me. What if I screw up? What if it misfires? Or they decide it's too weird? Dad leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Then you learn something. Or they learn something. Either way, they noticed. That's not nothing. We drove in silence, the hum of the engine filling the gaps my confidence couldn't. Fort Rowan's testing field wasn't the shiny PR-friendly corner from Family Day. It was all concrete trenches, scorched dividers, rusted platforms, and a long line of dummies arranged in attack formation. The space smelled like oil and dust, and the air was stiff with the kind of pressure that sits on your shoulders. Major Holt was already waiting, along with a handful of people I didn't recognize. 2 engineers, a guy from tactical development, and someone Dad whispered was a logistics liaison. And then, standing just a little off to the side, was Colonel Remmer again, arms crossed like usual, that same unreadable look locked on me. I swallowed hard. "Glad you made it," Holt said. "We've recreated yesterday's setup. But this time, we'll monitor range, signal disruption, and multi-target reaction. You'll have the floor." My hands shook slightly as I pulled the device from its padded case. This one had a fresh casing, slightly tighter seams, heavier grip pads. I'd spent half the night sanding the shell and testing the LED sync timing with an old GoPro in the garage. I'd even swapped the battery capsule for a smaller, lighter cell. I walked to the launch zone. Everyone else stood behind a reinforced glass divider, eyes on me, radios crackling. I knelt by a concrete wall and pressed the grenade's trigger pad. 2-second delay. A moment of stillness. Then, chaos. The pulse lit the field in a spectrum of rapid strobing, yellow, red, cyan, followed by a tight burst of sonic pressure that echoed off the barrier walls like a flash thunderclap. The dummies didn't react, obviously, but the ripple effect was visible in the personnel watching. Even behind glass, a few of them flinched. "Target suppression confirmed," one of the engineers muttered. "Short-range signal interference initiated. Clean frequency disruption within 15 feet. 0 shrapnel," another added. "No heat signature. No collateral spread." Major Holt looked from the screen to me. "Can you walk us through the specs again?" I did, clearer this time. My voice only trembled once. Afterward, one of the engineers approached the table where I had my tools laid out. She picked up a tiny coil, the same one I'd used for the internal resonance chamber. "You designed this tuning yourself?" I nodded. "Used the bell chamber from a broken ultrasonic cleaner. Rebuilt it to cycle through 2 frequency pulses, timed with the LED flicker rate. It tricks the brain into a delayed response." Her eyebrows shot up. "That's not in any standard playbook." "No," I said quietly. "It's not." They began talking among themselves, terms like field deployment, training simulators, and compliance kits. Dad stood a few paces behind me, arms relaxed at his sides, letting me handle it. That was his way. Colonel Remmer finally walked up, his boots slow and deliberate. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at the grenade in my hand like it had personally insulted him. "This thing," he said after a long silence. "You came up with it in a garage?" "Yes, sir." He nodded, still not looking at me. "You know, I've seen a lot of junk. Stuff that looks good on paper and falls apart the second it hits the field." I stayed silent. There wasn't much to say. He finally looked at me. "But this isn't junk. This is something else. You took what we missed and wrapped it in rubber." It almost sounded like a compliment. Almost. He held out his hand, not for a handshake, but to see the device again. I placed it in his palm. He turned to Holt. "How soon can we get field simulations rolling?" "We've got room in next month's schedule." Remmer nodded. Then, without looking at me, said, "Let's make it happen. 1,000,000 units. Pre-deployment order, training ops only. I want to see if it holds under pressure." My mouth went dry. Holt raised her brow. "That's a big commitment for a prototype." "She's not just a prototype," he muttered. "She's proof we've been looking in the wrong place." Then he walked away. I stood frozen, grenade still warm from the test in my hands. Major Holt smiled. "Guess that answers whether or not they're taking you seriously." Dad clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Told you, let the results talk." It didn't feel real. Not yet. But somewhere inside me something settled. Something deep and quiet. Like maybe, just maybe, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. They didn't roll out a red carpet. There were no balloons or reporters. No one handed me a medal or announced my name over a loudspeaker. But the next time I walked into Fort Rowan, the guards at the checkpoint waved me through like I belonged. I still didn't believe I did. Dad parked the truck near the R&D building, gave me a short nod, and handed me a small canvas bag. Inside were 3 updated versions of the Pulse Grenade, clean, sealed, color-coded for testing. The latest shell design was sleeker, more tactical. I'd spent the last 4 nights rebuilding the core from scratch with lighter components and reprogramming the flicker matrix to reduce energy draw. "Go get him," Dad said. He never said much, but when he did, it always landed like a brick of quiet reassurance. Inside, the base lab felt like an entirely different world from the range. Fluorescent lights, metal counters, machines that hissed softly. People in lab coats and uniforms moved between desks and monitors, their faces lit by spreadsheets and schematic. Some nodded at me. Others just stared. Major Holt met me near a cluster of workstations, her tablet tucked under one arm. "You're early," she said, smiling slightly. "I like that." I followed her down a row of prototype displays. Some were drones. Some were armor modules. One looked like a high-tech riot shield that folded into a backpack. "Command wants us to finalize the specs," she said. "They're greenlighting deployment trials in 3 environments: urban, arid, and naval boarding. We'll need your input on field variants." I blinked. "They want my input? You built it. You know how it breathes." That phrase stuck with me. We sat down with the testing team. Sergeant Creed was there too, quietly reviewing footage from the first demo. He didn't say much. He rarely did, but when I handed him one of the new prototypes, he gave it a small nod, turned it over once in his hand, and said, "Clean work." They ran simulations that week. I wasn't allowed in the live zones, but they sent me the data. Reaction times, blind durations, heat retention, bounce pattern. Everything logged, color-coded, annotated. The numbers didn't lie. It worked. Better than I expected. But something else happened too. People started asking me questions. Not just about the grenade, but about how I thought. One engineer brought me a targeting sensor that wasn't syncing with motion. Another asked how I'd built the capacitor coil to resist overheating. I answered each carefully, not because I was showing off, but because no one had ever really listened before. For once, I wasn't the strange kid in the corner with a wild idea. I was part of something. Still, not everyone was convinced. It was late afternoon when I was called into a side briefing room. The space was small, plain, just a few chairs, a table, and a screen showing field map. Colonel Remmer stood by the window, arms crossed, watching a set of trainees jog through a drill outside. He didn't look at me when I entered. "Sit," he said. I did. He turned finally, expression tight. "You're smart. I'll give you that. But smart doesn't always mean right." I stayed quiet. He walked over and tapped the table once. "You ever watch what happens when one of those things malfunctions in the field?" "No, sir. Neither have I. And I don't want to. Which is why I'm here." He slid a file across the table. Inside were projected logistics, material costs, transport guidelines, field note. There was a red-marked section labeled reliability, threshold under stress conditions. "You built this thing from scratch," he said. "And I don't care if you're 13 or 30, it's got to meet the same standard as everything else out there. Soldiers will rely on this. Real lives." I met his eyes. "I understand." He watched me for a moment longer. "Then help us make sure it's ready." That was the closest I ever got to approval from Colonel Remmer. But I didn't need a medal. I had a mission. The following week, I spent every afternoon at Fort Rowan. While other kids went home and opened homework packets or video games, I was adjusting deployment angles, fine-tuning delay timers, measuring audio spike. Trudy came by once and brought me a smoothie with a sticky note on the lid. Asterisk, still not a dog toy. Proud of you. Asterisk. Even the nickname started to fade. The fruit snack grenade had become a line item on the logistics board. One night, after a long coding session with Holt's team, I stood in the doorway of the testing lab, watching a Marine in full gear run a mock breach with 2 pulse grenades clipped to his vest. He moved like it belonged there. Dad joined me, hands in his pockets. They're ordering 1 million, he said quietly. Training ops, peacekeeping forces, and maybe more. Holt called it the Miles effect. I laughed. That sounds like a physics experiment gone wrong. Or gone right. I didn't respond for a moment. I just watched as the Marine tossed the device into a corner, watched the lights flare, saw the clean drop of reaction time. No fire. No harm. Just control. Is it weird, I said finally, that it started in our garage? Nope, Dad replied. Most revolutions do. And in that moment, surrounded by white walls and humming machines, I believed him.